You're completely busted, Mikey. Unless you had some kind of strange trip of amnesia and you didn't remember your own interview with Michael F. Bird on your channel. Who's the one misrepresenting him? You, bozo. You, dishonest, inspiring philosophy. We should call you inspiring dishonesty, because that's what you're doing. You are inspiring dishonesty, not philosophy, sir. And today's episode is an important one. Why? Because we have to expose another dishonest charlatan like Michael Jones, aka Inspiring Philosophy. Now I'm going to focus on him, although William Albright, we could say, is dishonest, but maybe not to the same degree, at least with this particular issue, as Michael Jones. And we'll see why in just a second. I don't want to belabor the point, but people know that there's been an ongoing back and forth between the three of us for about the past year, which resulted in the debate that I had, if you can call it that, more like a debacle on the part of William Albright on whether or not Justin Martyr was a Trinitarian. Now these boys have been scrambling. William's been doing live streams with priests and Father Kappas and Scam Shamoon and Inspiring Philosophy and all these different people because he knows how bad it went for him in the debate, and so he's trying to find some way to recuperate and restore his dignity, but it's not really working. It's only making things much worse and worse and worse for him. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to expose in a very, very clear fashion how somebody like Inspiring Philosophy is a completely dishonest individual. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And let's take a look at what the proof is. Here we go.
So Justin is replying to the old man. He says, "Is what you say then of a like nature with that of which Plato in Timaeus hints about the world, where or when he says that it is indeed subject to decay inasmuch as it has been created, but that it will neither be dissolved nor meet with the fate of death on account of the will of God? Does it seem to you the very same can be said of the soul and generally of all things? For those things which exist after God, or shall at any time exist, these have the nature of decay, and are such as may be blotted out and cease to exist. For God alone is unbegotten and incorruptible, and therefore he is God. But all other things after him are created and corruptible." So Jake's argument is God alone is unbegotten and corruptible. We know the Son is begotten. So is Justin saying that the Son is created and corruptible?
So in that first clip, Inspiring Philosophy Michael Jones is reading from Dialogue with Trypho chapter 5, which I used in my debate to completely annihilate the claim and annihilate William on his position that Justin Martyr was a Trinitarian. Now I have to give it to Michael. I know these guys are a little bit low IQ, but at least, the very least, Michael actually represented my argument accurately, which is the passage clearly says, only God the Father is unbegotten and incorruptible, and all other things besides him are begotten and corruptible. So the only thing that's incorruptible is the unbegotten God the Father. And therefore, even if you considered the Son God, which Justin does in some sense, but I argued as a lesser divinity, and this definitively actually proves it and shows that Justin was a subordinationist, which we're going to see. A scholar that Michael brought on his own show explicitly said that, and that's why Mikey is extremely dishonest, and I'm going to expose that in just a few moments. But Justin is very clearly saying that anything other than the unbegotten God the Father is begotten and corruptible. Well, in order to be the Most High God, you must be incorruptible. You cannot be subject to corruption, to decay, or anything of that nature, whether it be spiritually or morally or physically or in any sense. God is not subject to corruptibility or decay in any sense of that term. So that shows that Justin, because he believes that the Son is begotten, must be corruptible and therefore cannot be the Most High God. Very clear. Now, Mikey represented the argument accurately, so we gotta tip our hat to him in that respect, but let's go on to the next clip.
Dialogue with Trypho 5 is very clearly referring to those that are mortal. That is what is being referred to. And he points out that God, by his very nature, is not begotten. We recognize that. We know that. We agree. The problem is he's not dealing with anything. He's not dealing with anything other than the nature of God here. In distinction with mortal humanity, he doesn't get it. That's why he continues harping on Dialogue with Trypho 5, even quoting scholars, but taking them out of context.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that Justin, if you can maybe, if anything, fault Justin for was just not being detailed, but he's clearly contrasting created creatures with God. So this is just taking him out of context from as far as I can see. And
Yes.
make sure to address the fact that you're.
So he claims, Michael and William both claim that I'm taking Justin Martyr out of context, and that what Justin Martyr means in that dialogue with Trypho chapter 5, which he just read from, is that he's merely contrasting God with created beings, created humans. That's all he means. Therefore, they go on to say explicitly that the Son is not included in the passage. He's not included in the unbegotten God part, because nowhere does Justin call the Son unbegotten. But they also say that he's not included in the begotten corruptible part, because that's only talking about created human beings and maybe other created things, but it's not referring to the begotten Son. Now, I'm going to show definitively, while they claim that I am misrepresenting scholars, that they're actually misrepresenting the next scholar that we're going to read from, who is Michael F. Bird. Let's take a look.
Your favorite Trinitarian scholar, who you love to quote, admitted that Justin Martyr was a subordinationist in his interview on your channel and in his article quoted below. Okay, well, I went to that article. Let me pull that up here because I got it in a different tab here.
Yeah.
It's actually comes directly from this book, so I'm fully aware of it. It's on page 151. He's referring to this part here. Now, I'm going to ask you a simple question after I read this part here. Now, Michael F. Bird says, yet Justin also implies a certain subordination because God is unbegotten and everything after him is begotten and corruptive. William, do we disagree that there is some certain subordination going on between the Father and the Son?
No. And in fact, what Jake is doing is totally misunderstanding.
I'll make this pretty simple. When you see the word subordination, that doesn't mean subordinationism, or that he's a subordinationist. We agree with Bird here. There is a certain subordination as Orthodox Trinitarians. I mean, if you read this book, Michael F. Bird's main point is that sometimes Justin was not exact in his language because he didn't have the Nicene Creed in his pocket. So he may have been using words that may not have been exact or on point, but he's very clearly going through and showing that Justin and other church fathers were clearly Trinitarians. I highly recommend this book. I highly recommend it.
And I don't think,
if you just read Michael Bird's book, you can't take him out of context. It's clear he says, he doesn't say he's a subordinationist. He says there's a certain subordination, which again is consistent with Trinitarianism. So
they're reading a quote from a scholar, Michael F. Bird, from the text which he held up, which I'm going to go through in just a second. Michael Jones is making a distinction between subordination and subordinationism or subordinationist. And he says, Michael F. Bird doesn't call Justin a subordinationist, and he doesn't say that he's guilty of subordinationism. What he's referring to by subordination merely means that the Son is subordinate to the Father merely in terms of his role. And what Trinitarians mean by this is in the economy or how God relates to creation, in the sense that the Father sends the Son. The Son doesn't send the Father. The Son becomes a man and becomes incarnate. The Father doesn't. So in that sense, he's subordinate in role, but not in terms of his ontological status or his ontological being or anything of that nature, or in an Arian sense. And he's not a subordinationist. Michael F. Bird is not saying that Justin is a subordinationist, nor is he saying that he believes in subordinationism. So Michael Jones is trying to make a distinction between them, and he says that I am misrepresenting this scholar, and he recommends this book, which I recommended too. I think it has some mistakes in it, but at least gets this part on Justin Martyr correct. Here's the interesting thing, Mike and IP. This is the part where they're not dishonest, but they're just extremely low IQ, as I will go on to demonstrate in a future video, which is that they're reading the text and they're saying, well, all Michael F. Bird is saying is that Justin is saying that the Son is subordinate in role. But guess what? One of the texts that Michael F. Bird cites in support of that subordination is Dialogue with Trypho, chapter 5. The very same text that William and Michael said does not apply to the Son at all. So even if we grant it at this point, which is not true, but let's grant it for the sake of argument, that in that text by Michael F. Bird, he just means subordination and role. Well, he cites Dialogue with Trypho, chapter 5, to prove that subordination and role, but that same text, you guys, Dumb and Dumber, say is not actually applying to the Son at all. You said that the Son, S-O-N, is not in purview. So how could Michael F. Bird use that text to prove that the Son is subordinate in role if it's not even talking about the Son whatsoever? It's only making a distinction between the Father, the unbegotten God, and created mortal beings, as William and Michael said. That just debunks you right there. But we'll go on to see exactly what he means by ascribing that view. And I'm going to go through some passages in his book where he explicitly calls Justin a subordinationist. Let's take a look. So as you can see here, and this is a Kindle version, but it's on page 169 of the Kindle version. And I bought this just so that I could be able to share it on the screen here. It says, Justin and Origen, this is from Michael F. Bird, that same text. Justin and Origen define the Logos as definitively divine, meaning, yeah, they call the Logos or the Word or the Son God, but still subordinate to the Father. And we'll see in clearer terms what he means by subordinate to the Father, right? Does he mean subordinate, Michael F. Bird, merely in terms of role? Definitely not. Okay, so here's another example of what Michael F. Bird means by the Son being subordinate to the Father according to Justin Martyr's theology. Here he says, the problem is that Justin is not 100% consistent on this point, since he can speak of Jesus as an angel in one sense, but implicitly within a class of angels, as one who is subordinate to the divine will. Dialogue with Trypho, chapter 56, 61, 113, etc. Worshipped in second place behind the Father, while also part of God's divine being. So what does he mean by subordinate? One way is subordinate to the divine will, and subordinate in the sense of being worshipped in second place after the Father. And no, he doesn't mean merely in terms of second place as a second divine person in the Trinity, which we'll go on to see clearer in other passages. And also, he explicitly will state this on Inspiring Philosophy's own live stream. I just want to show you at the outset, so this is on page 380 of the Kindle version. Notice footnote number 279, Dennis Mins and Paul Parvis. Who is their guy quoting? Michael F. Bird? Who's he quoting, Mikey? He's quoting Dennis Mins and Paul Parvis. Now, not on this particular point, but just to show you, I'm not quoting or referencing fringe scholarship as they so frequently claimed about me. Let's take a look at footnote number 286. It says this. This is Michael F. Bird now speaking. He said, I am aware that proto-Orthodox is a broad and malleable category, including writers who wrote things that by later standards were not regarded as orthodox. Example, Justin. Wow. So what is he saying? Justin wrote things which according to later standards, meaning according to the standards today of Trinitarians, according to the standards of 4th century Trinitarianism, according to Nicene Orthodoxy, Justin's views, things that he wrote and his views would be considered unorthodox, i.e. heretical. So Justin wrote and had some heretical views according to Nicene Trinitarianism. Therefore, he's admitting right there boldly what he means by subordinate or subordination. Very clearly, Justin had unorthodox, i.e. heretical views. Can you hold to unorthodox or heretical views and be considered an orthodox Trinitarian? No, of course not. That's a contradiction. But just in case that didn't seal the deal, I'll give you one last example. This is on page 410 of the Kindle version. Michael F. Bird says this, and I quote, pay attention, guys. In direct contrast, Justin had a divine Christology, subordinationist in parts. But otherwise, Jesus was explicitly put into ontological parity with God the Father. Yet even Justin knows that Jesus resembles Hercules and Mercury, even if he fumbles over the reasons why. Wait, hold on a second. I thought Michael F. Bird, according to Inspiring Philosophy, said just subordination, and he meant subordination in role. But he didn't mean subordinationist or subordinationism. Here, Michael F. Bird explicitly calls Justin Martyr's theology subordinationist in parts, meaning that he was a subordinationist in parts of his theology. In other parts, he was orthodox, but in some parts, he fell into subordinationism, and Michael F. Bird declares him a subordinationist in that part. You cannot be a subordinationist merely if subordination just meant merely in terms of role, Michael. Can you? No. That's why you tried to make a distinction yourself between subordination and subordinationist and subordinationism. But Michael F. Bird clearly says Justin was a subordinationist in parts of his theology. That's why he also said in the previous quote that some of his views are considered heretical or unorthodox. You're busted. You're completely busted down. You're a dishonest fraud. And I'm going to demonstrate that even clearer now when I go to your interview with Michael F. Bird on your own channel where he deals with this topic. So let's take a listen. This is Michael F. Bird, the same author that they say I'm misrepresenting. I showed in his own text, which Inspiring Philosophy is recommending people read, and I recommend it as well, although I think he gets some things wrong. He got this right to say that Justin Martyr was a subordinationist in parts of his theology. Now, there's no excuse because we can't just say that Michael misread him, because we're going to see that, again, Michael F. Bird calls him a subordinationist in his own interview with him on his channel and explains more explicitly, even than in his book, what he means by that. Let's take a listen.
Another one here from Eddie. Didn't Justin Martyr say that Jesus is another God? And if you want, I can put that quote on the screen for you here.
Yeah, he did. He said he's like a second God. Philo says something similar about the Logos. He calls him a second God. Here's the problem. Like I said,
did you hear that, William? The original question was, didn't Justin Martyr say that Jesus was another God? Which is actually more appropriate terminology because that's explicitly what he says, heteros theos, another God. But as Greg pointed out, there's actually not a significant difference in this context between heteros theos, another God, and deuteros theos. Because for Justin, yes, the Son was another God, but he was a second God, separate and distinct from the Most High God, the Father. But Michael F. Bird, just like Father Kappas in the article you bozos put out on William Albrecht's channel, which you still don't even recognize, and you're still criticizing Greg for saying deuteros theos, which isn't even germane to the argument, because we still make the same point with heteros theos. But Father Kappas used deuteros theos and heteros theos somewhat synonymously and interchangeably in the article on William's own website, yet you're chiding Greg for supposedly making an error in that regard, which again is not crucial to the argument being made. Now, again here, Michael F. Bird does the same thing, and he ascribes it to Justin using, basically calling him a second God, and he attributes it to Philo as well, where he does say that, and basically is saying that Philo and Justin are saying the same thing. But Philo wasn't a Trinitarian. No matter how much Father Kappas and these other guys want to claim, Philo was not a Trinitarian. That's just absurd. But anyway, let's take a listen further what Bird says here.
Is, trying to figure out what's the best language to describe Jesus. Now, Justin Martyr can use the language of a second God. He can also describe Jesus as coming from the Father, I think, as light from the sun or light from a candle, which you could argue maybe confuses the source with the effect or something. But people are using all sorts of language and terms to try articulate who Jesus is, like I said, in light of scripture, in light of tradition, and in a way that's often compelling or coherent to a Jewish or a pagan audience. You can say this about Justin Martyr. He kind of helps the church move forward in the discussion on Christology. So he's doing things that are moving, I think, the discussion forward. But a lot of what he says by later standards would be regarded as either erroneous or incomplete. So, you could argue that Justin Martyr definitely has a divine Christology, but in places it's still a little bit clumsy or clunky when compared to the later Nicene statements of it. But you can see how what Justin Martyr is doing, the way he describes Jesus, you can see how it's moving on a trajectory towards something like Nicaea, but he's not there yet.
Did you hear that? By later standards, a lot of the things, not just some of the things. Michael F. Bird says a lot of the things that Justin says would be regarded by later standards, meaning 4th century Nicene Trinitarianism, which I argue that's when Trinitarianism is officially birthed in the 4th century, which is the whole point of this debate and dispute. That what does Bird say? Bird says a lot of what Justin writes would be regarded as erroneous or at the very least incomplete in comparison to Nicene standards. And then he says that Justin is, quote, moving on a trajectory towards Nicaea, but he's not there yet, meaning he did not believe in the same thing as Nicaea, very clearly. But if that wasn't enough, it's only going to get worse for Mr. Dishonest IP right here. Let's take a look.
So you could call Justin, in some senses, proto-Nicene, but in other senses, he might be somewhat anti-Nicene. He does have a little bit of a subordinationist tendency in some aspects. So in some ways, you could say he was closer to Arius.
Wow, Mikey, you just got folded like a beach chair, son. We just demonstrated how dishonest you are because Michael F. Bird explained what he meant by subordination, according to Dialogue with Trypho chapter 5, which proves my point that it's a good argument against the claim that Justin Martyr was an Orthodox Trinitarian, because it demonstrates that he was a subordinationist, and that's what he was referring to. So remember when you made that distinction between subordinationist/subordinationism and just mere subordination in role? Bird is not saying that. He explicitly says, and I quote, "You could call Justin in some sense proto-Nicene," meaning in some ways he agrees with Nicaea. But in other senses, he might be anti-Nicene, not anti with an E as in before Nicaea, but anti with an I, meaning he is against Nicaea in some sense. How is he against Nicaea? Bird says, and I quote, "He does have a little bit of a subordinationist," not subordination in role. And Nicene Orthodox Trinitarians, including these guys, or at least they claim to be, William and Michael, can you be anti-Nicene if you only believe that the Son is subordinate in rank, like you claimed Michael F. Bird was saying about Justin? No, of course not, because you agree that Nicaea and the Orthodox believe that the Son is subordinate merely in terms of role. But Michael F. Bird says that Justin's theology is anti-Nicene, against Nicaea, because he has a subordinationist tendency in some aspects. Just like I read from his book, he called him a subordinationist in some aspects and is contradicting Nicaea in some aspects. He says it even in clearer terms. He says, in some ways, you could say he, meaning Justin, was closer to Arius. So in what way is Michael F. Bird saying that Justin was a subordinationist? In what sense? In the sense that he contradicted Nicaea, and in the sense that he was closer to Arius in some ways. Was Arius merely a subordinationist in terms of role? That the Son is merely subordinate to the Father in terms of role? No, of course not. You're completely busted, Mikey. Unless you had some kind of strange trip of amnesia and you didn't remember your own interview with Michael F. Bird on your channel. Who's the one misrepresenting him? You, bozo. You, dishonest, inspiring philosophy. We should call you inspiring dishonesty, because that's what you're doing with this clip. You are inspiring dishonesty, not philosophy, sir. Bird says, in some ways, you could say Justin was closer to Arius and was a subordinationist in some aspects, and was anti-Nicene in some aspects, and was not fully there on board with Nicaea. How can you get any clearer? He's saying he was not an Orthodox Trinitarian, and that in his book he had heretical views or unorthodox views. I thought that Bird didn't call Justin a subordinationist, Mikey. What happened? You got caught. You're busted. But let's take a listen at the rest of that part, just for the sake of honesty on our part, to see what Michael had to say.
In the 4th century, but in other ways, he's also a precursor of Athanasius and Nicene Christology. And this is the thing: it's messy. It's not like a pure development. It's like going from, A to B. It's a little bit kind of, and we ended up at Nicaea. So, that's why it's messy. And that's why I do a podcast called Nazareth Nicaea, because I like to plot the messiness of what's going on in the early church's discourses of Jesus's divinity.
Yeah, I like how you said.
Well, I thought it was so clear, like William and IP are saying, oh, it's so clear that Justin was an Orthodox Trinitarian, right? It's so clear. It's merely only a problem in language. No, it's not only a problem in language. Michael F. Bird says that Justin was anti-Nicene, had unorthodox views, and was closer to Arius in some aspects, was not there fully at Nicaea, and also that he was a subordinationist. Not just merely subordination in terms of role, Mikey, because he compared that subordinationist or nism to Arius, who was not believing that the Son was merely subordinate in terms of role. He believed he was God, but a lesser and distinct God, not the same God or the Most High God as the Father, and not merely subordinate in terms of role. So that's the context of Michael F. Bird's statement about dialogue with Trypho chapter 5, which completely buries you guys and demonstrates that Justin was not an Orthodox Trinitarian. He was a subordinationist in some aspects, as Michael F. Bird said.
Messy thing. I did a stream a few months ago with Jay Dyer, and we talked about Justin Martyr a little bit. Sometimes does.
Yeah, that stream with Jay Dyer when you guys tried to team up to refute me and it didn't work. And now you invited this guy on to help somewhat in that cause, and he buried you on your own live stream. Wow, this is embarrassing, Mikey.
Use imprecise language. Like, we acknowledge that. But if you look like in chapter 61 here, he says, he compares the Father and the Son to fire. And he says, just as we see also happening in the case of fire, which is not lessened when it has kindled another, but remains the same. So here he says that, Jesus coming from the Father, it remains the same of what it came from. So when he talks about another God, this is him trying to capture that language. You also have to understand that Justin Martyr was very much influenced by Greek philosophy, and he didn't think the Father ever really appeared to anyone in the Old Testament. Who is always appearing to people like Abraham? That's Jesus, according to Justin Martyr. If you go through his dialogue with Trypho. So, it's very interesting.
And you could say, well, it's wrong to call him a second God. And Justin Martyr would say, yeah, but it's also wrong to say Jesus and the Father are the same God. Because that would be like modalism. So again, what's he trying to affirm and what's he trying to deny by saying that? And it took the church a long time to figure out the best language to do those things.
Yeah, and that's a fair assessment. I think sometimes the language can be clumsy. I don't think anyone denies that. So here we go.
So Michael IP was trying to push back because he didn't like what his own guest had to say. But in reality, his guest, Michael F. Bird, don't make any excuses for him. Don't be confused what he said. He was not merely saying that Justin had problems with language. Yes, he does say that, but that's not the only thing. Because if it was merely a problem in terms of language, but not in terms of content about what he actually believed or meant by that language, like William and Inspiring Philosophy and Scam Shamoon and Father Kappas are saying, oh, another God just means another divine person. That would be Michael F. Bird saying, oh yeah, then yeah, it's just a problem with language, but what he meant by that is the same thing as Nicaea. No, he's not saying that what he meant by the language is the same thing as Nicaea. He's saying the content of his belief and what he said is problematic. It is conceived by later Trinitarian thought to be unorthodox, to be heretical, for him to be anti-Nicaea or anti-Nicene, meaning against Nicaea, to be subordinationist, showed you in his own interview on your channel and also in his book, which you claim to have read, Mikey. He says Justin was a subordinationist in some aspects. And what does he mean by that? Not merely subordinate in terms of role, as you claimed, but according to Dialogue with Trypho chapter 5, subordinate in much more than in terms of role and in terms of economy, as William said. No, that's not what Michael F. Bird said. He said what he meant by subordinationist tendency is that he was closer to Arius in some ways than closer to Nicaea. Very clearly he stated that. Now, he did have some beliefs that would be in agreement with later Trinitarian thought, but a lot of what he said would be considered erroneous, heretical, or unorthodox, and in agreement with Arius than with Nicaea. You're completely busted down, Mike. There's no excuse for you in terms of ignorance because he said it on your own channel. He called Justin a subordinationist, where you said Michael F. Bird would never say that. He just meant subordinate in terms of role. And he also said it explicitly in the book, which I just read from, which you claim to have read. So you're dishonest. Please change your name to Inspiring Dishonesty instead of Philosophy. With that being said, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video and you found it educational at the very least. And if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you get notified of future videos. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Share this on your social media platforms, no matter how big or how small your reach is. It really does help with the algorithm, guys. And if you want to go above and beyond and support my channel, then the best two ways to do so are at the GoFundMe link and the Patreon link, which are pinned at the top of the description of this video, as well as in the comment section. With that being said, guys, until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.